The views expressed on the following program are not necessarily those of WPSL, but you're encouraged to like and share them on Facebook. It's time for the Sue Ellen Sanders Show.
Welcome to the Sue Ellen Sanders Show, and good week, good Monday evening to you, and I'm glad you're with us tonight. We're like past the longest day of the year. We're well into summer. We can't really say that we're at the beginning of summer yet because we've passed the beginning of summer. We're there. We should be doing our summer things now, and whether you're planning a vacation, whether you're planning a staycation, whether you're just going to hang at home and relax, or whether your life during the summer is business as usual, I'm glad that you're listening to the show today. A lot of people think, and my guest is, by the way, is Ellen Gillette. She is a fellow writer. She and I both wrote for the Fort Pierce News Tribune 25 years ago.
Yes.
Or more, maybe. More, yeah, maybe closer to 30. And we've both lived in the St. Lucie County area for at least that long. You longer than me, right?
We moved to Fort Pierce when I was 9.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. So you've lived here for quite some time,
Yes.
for at least 25 years, right?
Yes. Now, after I got married, there was a year we spent in India with our 4 children. And 7 years ago, we moved back to Fort Pierce from about 6 years in North Carolina.
Yeah,
But
you had the
other than that-
respite in North Carolina, where the summers are a little bit cooler. And, you know, I love the Treasure Coast. I remember when I first moved here, I first followed my husband up here. We had just gotten married, and we both lived in West Palm, and he had moved up here right before we got engaged. And then we got engaged, and I had resigned my position, which was in West Palm, and I was going to come and get a job in public relations and writing up on the Treasure Coast. So I followed him up here, and at the time I was like, oh, this is like a sleepy little town. I can't believe you're bringing me up here. This is like nothing compared to Palm Beach County. I don't want to be here. I'm like dragging my feet. But within a week, I was kind of like, oh, this is kind of a cool place. Pulled into downtown Fort Pierce, interviewed at Harbor Federal Savings and Loan, became their PR director, and loved the old-fashioned touch of the Treasure Coast, and started writing for the Tribune. And that's when I first met Ellen. And like I said, we were fellow writers, and she was very welcoming of me. At the time, she already had children and was writing about some family issues. And I started writing a family column for the Tribune when my son was 9 months old and I was pregnant with my daughter. So we both were writing about a lot of family and community issues at the same time. And sometimes we wrote about the same things. And sometimes we got ideas from each other. And
I remember you were pregnant when we worked together on the playground.
Yes, and the creative playground.
Yes.
And I was pregnant with the first child. Although the two were really close together, and sometimes when I'm remembering the days that I'm pregnant, it's just like one really long 2.5 year period. Sometimes I'd run into people at cocktail parties, and you know, they knew that last time they had seen me, I was pregnant, and then I was pregnant again, and they were like, whoa, this is a really long gestation period.
One for the Guinness Book of World Records.
I know. But the wonderful thing about writing, of course, is that you can do it anywhere, and you can do it any place. And in today's world, it's literally universal, because you can sit at a computer and send your words into cyberspace or to a publication or to a person anywhere in the world?
I have 2 blogs, one that I only contribute to very sporadically. That's more of a essay type blog. And then I have a poetry blog that I started because a friend of mine who comes into play with the book also encouraged me to write a poem every day. And I knew that I wouldn't do it unless I went public. So I announced, okay, I'm going to write a poem a day, and that's the name of the blog. And for 1,000 days, I did it.
You did? I know you did. And that's like almost 3 years. So probably within your first couple months, I was reading the poems, and I thought, I could do that. And I lasted 2 days. I wrote 2 poems, one after another. And that was the year that my daughter first went away to college. So that first month of poems, which after the first 2 days became weekly and then monthly and then semi-annually.
Well, once I let myself off the hook for the poem a day, my discipline went down the tubes. I have not done as much as I should have done.
But that first month of poems where I was emulating your regular poems and a poetry blog, and this is what I say, writers a lot of times take inspiration from all sorts of different places, but they also take inspiration from each other. And that, I had totally forgot about the poetry blog. Because those poems, I go look back on them now and I just laugh because they're all about Chloe leaving home.
Well, if you read back over those 1,000 days and beyond, I mean, some of
it's
them
like a
are
diary.
Well, some of them are just terrible.
Yeah.
And some of them are pretty good.
Well, it was also election year when I started writing them. And so there's Obama poems. There's Michelle Obama poems. There's I'm mad at Ryan poem because he lied about how fast his marathon was. And then when I saw you were using haikus some of the time, I went, I can write a haiku. So anyhow, there's all different types of writing is my point. And one of my favorite, or maybe even least favorite things about being a writer as a profession is that people don't really think it's a profession. People think it's just something she does.
Right. A hobby.
A hobby. I can remember, I would have a column that I was writing once a week, another thing that I was doing twice a week, and all these different writing projects, a newsletter that I was writing, and yet my mother would still introduce me as a stay-at-home mom.
Well, that was one of the things that encouraged me to start writing. I just loved to write, and I was a stay-at-home mom, and I wanted to find some ways to use other talents and maybe supplement my husband's hardworking income. So that was a draw, but it certainly blossomed from there. And it was just incredible, as I'm sure you remember, being a weekly columnist for the Tribune, knowing that Wednesday was my day.
Monday was mine, yes.
And on Wednesday, people were having coffee in their homes, reading what I had written, and I would get feedback and letters, and you know what that was like. It was just wonderful to know that you were touching your community.
I loved waking up on Monday morning. I've never, those 14 years that I was a columnist, there's never been a time where I was happier to be awake on Monday morning. Because of exactly the way you described it. It was a neat feeling, and it was kind of fun to be at the deli counter at Publix and have somebody say, "So, how did da-da-da go?"
Yes.
And
I did have somebody stop me at the grocery store and just ream me out.
Oh, I've had that too. And
that's okay.
That, of course, is the danger also of being a writer is sometimes people are your fans and sometimes they're not. And you don't always know that you're writing something controversial while you're writing it.
Right.
A lot
I
of
get into
times,
that a lot of trouble on Facebook. I think I'm just writing this innocuous opinion, and suddenly I'm like in the middle of World War III.
well, we were talking about how everybody is a writer now, and we have so many forums, so many online forums, with Facebook, of course, being first and foremost, and God help us all, Twitter now, which is not always a successful way to communicate, especially important things. I really feel like you need more than headlines.
Yes.
And even now that Twitter has expanded beyond the length that it was originally, it's still, you can't give enough information to really get your full information out there. And so, the natural thing as a writer, and and being in this profession for many years, you also learn to be a Jack, really a Jill of all trades. Because being a writer means that you usually love to read, and that means that you're pretty good at being a teacher too. And this is another place where it's so funny. Is it coincidence, or are all writers like you or I? Because Ellen is also, she's been a teacher, and she's been an English teacher, as I have been. She also has been involved in drama. I've only done stuff at the Pineapple Playhouse and in West Palm Beach, but I know that you've also, you're working with ACT Studios in Stewart, too.
As a matter of fact, I'm in rehearsal now for their Shakespeare production this summer, which I've never acted in a Shakespearean play, so that's pretty exciting. They're putting on Macbeth. Now, as a substitute for maternity leave at John Carroll, I taught Macbeth
to
was high
just
school
thinking,
seniors.
you know
but
what?
I've never been
and
in
so
it.
in 10th grade, it's part of the curriculum for the 10th graders. And it would be nice to get this information out to kids, because if you got a kid that's going into 10th grade, it would be really awesome for them to come see the play.
Yes, I think it would
and
be.
then, don't you think?
I do.
Because there's no better way to kind of a preview for those incoming 10th graders, is you're going to have to read the play, and Shakespeare is not easy to decipher.
It is not. And the way it is delivered can communicate the meaning. That's our director, Dennis O'Donovan, stresses that. It's, if you believe what you're saying, the audience will understand, even if it's couched in all this, Shakespearean prose.
And the bottom line is, if you're going to believe what you're saying, you, Ellen Gillette, have to understand what you're saying. So, man, you got to know Macbeth back and forth.
Well,
you're
I have a
you're
small
Katie,
part.
right?
Yes,
You're
I am going to be the queen of the witches.
The queen of the witches.
So.
You are representative of fate. So that is one of the major themes in Macbeth.
Yes, the three witches really drive the action.
Yes.
But I've just had so much on my plate this summer. I said, could I please just have a small part?
No, and it's a juicy, it's a juicy part.
Yes,
Yes, it absolutely
whole
is.
Monologue.
Yes, yeah. And you get to say with the other witches, the little spell.
Yes. I'm going to be bossing them around.
Yes.
And
then of course Macbeth and Donald Bane. No, it's not Donald. Is that his buddy, Donald Bane? Yes, that is.
So it's going to be a great production. I sat in on the audition, so I saw who was going to be which part. A friend of mine from the Pineapple, who teaches drama at Centennial, Trina Pye, is going to be Lady Macbeth. And so it's just
now
going to be
that would be a fun.
Oh yes.
Because she goes crazy.
Yes,
she's kind of crazy to begin with, but then she gets crazier.
Yes, and all of the ladies had to read the out damn spot that section. So that was, we all got a taste of it. But.
Yeah. So when is the play going
It
to be?
begins July 20th.
Yeah.
So the 20th, 21st, 22nd, and then the following weekend. So it's
Cool.
just two weekends.
So very cool. So now you know all about Ellen. You know that she is a writer. She's a mom. She's a grandmom.
Nana.
Nana. Okay, everybody gets to pick their own. And she is a teacher, and she's a lover of words. And she is also, as I said, a writer. And of course, the pinnacle of anyone who is a writer's career is to publish a book. And so the bottom line is that's what Ellen has done. And we have She Bear in the beautiful garden here in the studio, fresh, hot off the press. Yes. We're going to talk about how you got to it, how you came up with the idea for the book. Were there other books that you wanted to write before? Were there other things that you'd published that led you on the way to publishing this?
Well, when we moved to Lillington, North Carolina, the plan was I was going to write and help raise grandchildren and not work outside of the home. I was going to just stay there on our ranch. We had 80 acres. And went with cows and horses and pigs and chickens, but we shifted over to goats. So I was a goat rancher. That was a lot of fun for a few years.
That is something that I didn't copy of yours. I just want to say I'm not going to be like that.
But I was sitting in my office one day and looking for publishers online, looking through my writer's market. I thought I would like to try my hand at writing fiction. And I found a niche publisher online called CarePoint Publishing that only did discussion group workbooks. And they had a little place to respond. If you were going to write a discussion group workbook, what would it be? And
what is a discussion group workbook?
Well, let's say
so like
everybody
from a book
has
club?
a workbook and you read and answer questions and then discuss it. So I typed in, if I were going to write a workbook, the title would be Bad Sheep, When God's People Let You Down, about the different hurts that we encounter in the very place we think we will be safest, inside church walls. And they liked the idea and asked me to send an outline and then asked me to send a sample chapter. And suddenly I was publishing a book. And Bad Sheep was available as a hard copy for a number of years, and then CarePoint went out of business. So I rewrote it as a straight book, and it's on smashwords.com, only as an electronic version.
As the first version, though, as a workbook, so you were writing ideas for discussion points,
Yes.
and then it was interactive where people participated.
And I actually got to lead the workshop with a group of women at my church, which was
That is
Crossroads in
really
Lillington.
neat.
And that
Yeah.
was great because I learned so much
Yes.
from the other ladies. And that led to hearing one of the women's stories. Her name is Shirley Veltman. And as she started to tell her story of when she was a child, I said, you should write a book. She said, well, I don't know anybody who can write. I'm a speaker, but I don't write. I said, well,
I know someone.
I'd be glad to take a look at that. And I believe it was last year, if not the previous year, she published her memoirs, Fully Relying on God, as told to
Yes.
Ellen Gillette. And that was a lot of fun to tell someone else's story. Many years ago, we returned from India, and I did something I had never done. I had 4 young children, and I left them for a week to fly to Arizona to a writers' conference. I knew Jamie Buckingham and also David Manuel, they've both since passed away, but I wanted to go to this writers' conference to find out, okay, am I going to write letters to the editor? Am I going to write a book? I really didn't know. I knew I loved to write, but how do I best use that? And so that conference really solidified some things. And one of the things they said was that everybody has a story, but not everybody knows how to put it down. So there's a real need for writers who can sort of get outside of themselves and write somebody else's story, help empower them, in other words. And Jamie Buckingham said, he was a minister. He said, if I preach a really good sermon, maybe 300 people will hear it. But if I write it down and if I publish it, there's no limit to the number of people who will hear that. So writing really does empower someone with deep thoughts or fun stories or whatever is in their heart to reach a wider audience. And that's why I'm so excited about She Bear, because I feel like she's been in a cage for 10 years and now she's finally got an audience, and I'm very excited about it.
Well, before we continue on with She Bear, there's something else that I wanted to talk to you about. And that's the fact that we were talking about, when you're at a party or something and you say that you're a writer, and somebody who is an engineer or a lawyer or a businessman or whatever, they go, oh, yeah, I'm going to write a book, or I want to write a book. And so people do think that anybody can write a book. And if you go to the library, or if you go to the bookstore, or today's world, you go online, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of really bad books.
Well, unfortunately, because we can, anybody can self-publish a book.
Yeah. But even books that are published by a publisher.
I know, you think, well, where are the editors in this?
No.
Or didn't anybody proofread this?
Do they not know that this person is telling the same story over and over and just changing the name of the characters?
Well, there must be
a market for it.
Yes.
Yes, and that's exactly what goes on with books. Is there's something for everybody, I'm sure.
The horror story that She Bear's beginning was, I have to tell you.
Okay.
Because it looked like everything was going to be really rolling along quickly. I had the idea. I think I was listening to a videotape in a women's group at church, and she started talking about the Garden of Eden. And my mind just went off on a tangent, and I started thinking about, the Bible tells us that when they left the Garden of Eden that God fashioned them clothes. And I started thinking, where did the clothes come from? And that was just the germ of the idea. And so I wrote a story that I don't know if I consciously didn't use God or Adam and Eve. I used different names.
Mm-hmm.
But it does seem to have a more universal appeal. I mean, the creation story is in every culture.
And sometimes if people see that the word God is in the book, they just won't buy it just because.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, even strict evolutionists who don't believe in creation still wonder about our beginnings.
Yes.
So I started thinking about all of that, but from the perspective of the world's first bear. And it is she and her cub who have this unique destiny, and it isn't anything she thought of. And so I put the story down, and it sounded pretty good.
And unique.
It was touching.
Yeah.
And I didn't see anything else like it online.
Yeah.
And I gave it to a few first readers, a children's librarian and some friends, some ministers, and got really good feedback. I read it out loud to a group of people. They gave me good feedback. I met a publisher in Fayetteville. I was there with Bad Sheep for a local authors event in Fayetteville and met this woman who had published children's books and seemed interested in the manuscript. And I sent it to her, and she liked it. And for the next 8 years, we went through 4 contracts, 3 illustrators. It was just a quagmire of miscommunication and lack of communication and frustration. And I really thought over the last 10 years, it's never going to happen. And people encouraged me and just kept going. I referenced our first editor, Did you write with Lee Barnes?
Oh, yes, I did.
Okay, Lee
Yeah.
Barnes.
Is he in Tampa now? Or is
Yes,
he
he
retired?
spoiled me for
Yeah.
any other editor because he was such an encourager.
He was. He was very empowering.
Yes, and we've stayed in touch over the years. He was in Burlington at the times there when I was in Lillington, and he wanted me to meet someone who had also lost a child, so I had traveled then, and we've stayed in touch via email. And he would listen to me vent about the problems I was having with the publisher, and he would encourage me to illustrate it myself, which I ended up doing, and encouraged me to just hang in there, keep pursuing it. And I finally thought, I really believe in this story. I should be willing to invest not only my time and my heart, but some finances. And I had really started out opposed to that. I wanted a traditional publisher, royalties. That just wasn't going to happen.
At least not in this lifetime.
Yes, not for not trying. I sent out many, many packets.
Yeah.
If I had had an agent, I think it would have gone far differently. But getting an agent these days is about as difficult as getting a publisher.
Right, because they want you to have published.
Yes.
It's kind of the whole first job quagmire.
Yes, kind of
they
a
want you
catch-22.
to, yeah, they want you to have published before they'll become your agent, but you can't publish until you get an agent. So,
Well,
yeah.
With self-publishing, writers have a greater opportunity to get. I mean, the man who wrote The Shack self-published, and that just exploded on the world.
And then after they self-publish, there are a number, probably hundreds of authors who end up with additional printings that publishing houses pick up.
Yes. Now
So that could happen.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
it could. And what happened with me is, here I'm thinking traditional publisher, it's never going to happen. After I did finally wise up and part company with the publisher that just drug it on forever. And I was cleaning my office one day, and I saw this business card that must have been 3 or 4 years old. It was from way back when I was subbing for the public schools as well as the Catholic schools. And I had been there one day when Janet Searsent read one of her books to a class, and I had gotten her business card. She has La Maison Publishing in Vero, and her card was still there after all that time. And I picked it up, and I emailed her, told her the situation, wondered if she was a traditional publisher or self-publisher. She is a self-publisher, but at a fraction of the cost that I had seen anywhere else. She works out of her home, and so she doesn't have the overhead, and she's just been great. And she will say, I'm not an editor. No, she's a publisher.
You have to provide your own editing services.
Yes, because I wanted it to be as near perfect as it could be. So,
yeah. If you're going to publish something, it's going to
yes,
be.
If it's going to have my name on it, I want it
Yes.
to be right.
Yeah.
So it's been an exciting venture. I have a website now. This is all new. Marketing, websites, Instagram.
I know. And you know what I love about it is that you asked your friends on Facebook to tell you how to do a website.
Yes.
And you had all of these different suggestions, and you ended up using Wix, right?
Yes, and
which
it was
is
pretty
really,
user-friendly.
Yeah.
But that, and the book is on Amazon without a picture. I don't know what's up with that. They haven't gotten the cover photo out. But Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and then you can also order from the website.
And also, you know how to promote, so you can promote it.
Well, I believe in it. There's that tendency we have to not be self-promoting because, that just doesn't seem right. But I really believe in this story. It's a beautiful story. I cry every time I read it.
Well, we're going to hold up a copy so you can see, too, on our little mini screen here.
Please order it.
And we'll send a picture to Cliff later so he can add it to the YouTube video.
Great.
But it's called She Bear in the Beautiful Garden, and it's written and illustrated by Ellen Gillette. All except for the cover.
Yes,
which
my
is
friend Andrea Cox lived in Lillington when I wrote it, and she was very excited about illustrating it, and then she had to move away. So she gave me the painting and said, do with it what you want, and I was so pleased to be able to use it for the cover.
It's beautiful. And a lot of times, well, I shouldn't say a lot of times, but sometimes self-published works look like you kind of put them on the press in your garage.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Because people who are self-publishing might not always know the type fonts to use,
Yes.
or the graphic knowledge, or that the space issues of where you set your type, and that the white space is just as important as the
Yes.
type space.
Well, if you look through, Janet Serzant really did a good job working with me on placement of
She did,
illustrations
yes.
and the font we talked about, and I could sit with her and say, no, this is off because of so whatever. But she just was very patient and thorough and wanted it to be as right as I wanted it to be. So I said I would plug La Maison Publishing because she really did a great job.
And we'll get that information, and we can add that to
Great.
the YouTube as well. It's awesome that she offers that opportunity, because a lot of times you might be afraid, and you'd probably be right to be afraid, that if you self-publish, that the press that's self-publishing for you is making a lot of money on you, because that's their business and that's what they do.
Yes.
So you don't know that you're getting your money's worth, because, as a writer, you may not know exactly how much it costs to publish things.
Well, the contract, there wasn't a contract, but there was an agreement, and looked over, talked about, there's a certain fee to get an ISBN number, which you need to be able to be placed on these websites to sell.
So that's really important. Don't
Yes.
skip over that.
No.
Yeah.
And there was a proof sent to me, which I had to okay before it was put into production. So it's going to be right if you have someone like Janet, who is reputable and a writer herself, who knows how important it is to get your story out there and get it out correctly. We just spent the time necessary back and forth. I'm very picky. She was very patient, because I would say, there needs to be a space before this ellipse, and
But you wanted it to be right. I
Yes.
mean, your name is on it,
Yes.
and it's in print forever and ever.
Yes. Isn't that exciting?
Yes.
It can be in print forever and
Yes.
ever.
Yeah.
She Bear's story can outlast me and outlive me and my grandchildren. That's exciting.
And it's an awesome book to read out loud to your kids.
Yes, it works well as a read to me because it's got so many illustrations. And also, older children enjoy reading it. It's at about a 5th grade vocabulary, according to the children's librarian that read it. And I read it to a group of adults who had some good feedback and who enjoyed it, because it's about
It's a
loss.
universal story.
Yes,
Yeah.
loss and betrayal and love and sacrifice.
Yeah. And you probably know this too, having written for the paper for very many years, but the average newspaper is actually written for 5th grade level.
Yes.
So 5th grade level is definitely something that all ages can
Right.
feel comfortable with. And as a read aloud, to read to your children, to have it be a family story that, maybe all the kids in your family get the book, and then they will get the book for their kids. It could be that
I
kind
would
of
like
thing.
that.
Wouldn't that be so cool?
Yes, one of the advantages to ordering the book from my website, which is www.shebearandthebeautifulgarden.com, which getting a domain is important too
Yes.
if you're going to market, is that there's a place where you can ask for personalization, which, local people, if they buy it from Amazon or Barnes & Noble, they can always find me and I'll
Yeah.
personalize it.
Are you going to do some book signings? I
Yeah,
hope so.
I hope so.
Yeah, yeah. So, and then you could get the book and
Yes.
have Ellen sign it at a book signing. But you can also get it personalized if you order it from her website, www.shebearinthebeautifulgarden.
Yes, all one
So-
big word.
Yes. Now, there are a lot of things. If you're listening to this show and you say, I have a book in me, I know I do, or I have a story, or I have whatever, a letter to the editor that I want to write, and you want to learn to voice your opinion in writing, or voice, if not your opinion, somebody else's opinion, or the facts, or what you perceive to be the facts. There are a lot of different writing groups on the Treasure Coast that you can be a part of, and some of them are groups like the St. Lucie County Library sponsors, where authors come and they share their work. You're not really writing as part of a group. Or there's groups like what Wendy Dwyer hosts at the Inner Truth Project once a month.
What a fun group. It's mostly ladies, but occasionally we have other men, and of course Dan is usually there.
And I RSVP'd this last time to come, and then couldn't make it. But it's on my to-do list because I really
Good.
want to go. When I was teaching full-time, Monday evenings were really tough. Well, Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays, because I had a 6:30 a.m. in the morning report, which I just still can't even get over. I know I've been sleeping in now for over a week, but I still.
Well, the writing group at the Inner Truth Project started as an outreach to victims of sexual abuse. That's sort of what the plan was, that Wendy would facilitate their writing down their experiences, and
As
that's
a
always
catharsis,
cathartic.
yes.
So that's not who showed up necessarily,
Yeah.
although as we've gotten to know each other better and have heard some of our backgrounds, we do have, there's still that thread that goes through it, but we've written, Wendy usually gives us a homework assignment, and we can write prose or poetry or whatever on that topic. But just the encouragement, I mean, these folks have been in with me since I told them that I was going to illustrate it myself, since I explained, the problems I had had, and they've just been so helpful and so encouraging. They're excited for me, and that's what you need, especially when you're starting out on a new project. You need those balcony people who are cheering you on, not the basement people trying to drag you down and tell you it can't be done.
And you can also, one of the best ways to learn to write is to read.
Yes.
And at any age, really. And that's where, we make the crossover in the teaching, writing, and then back to teaching again, is because whatever grade I've ever taught, that's what I've told parents, and that's what I've told kids, is if you want to become a better writer, you need to read, and read the kind of book you want to write, or read and decide that's not the kind of book you want
Right.
to write. Learn from another writer's mistakes. Learn from another writer's successes.
And
But
even
read.
the rudimentary stuff that kids just hate, the grammar. When I substitute now, I'm just subbing now, and I tell them that you have a story inside of you, and no one's going to read it if it's not done properly. If you don't speak properly, if you don't use correct grammar, if you don't learn these fundamentals, and it's that important because your story is important. So you need to do it well.
And, you need to realize that the whole thing, whether you're writing an essay or writing a story or writing a book, how important those first few lines and those first few paragraphs are, because you've either got somebody's attention or you don't.
I remember picking up a book on a shelf at a bookstore, and it was a famous series. And so I picked it up. I think it was about Amish women. And I'm flipping through it, and I start reading the first page, and I thought, I don't care what happens to this person. And I put it back. You have to engage your reader. You have to draw them in.
Yeah. And the thing about being a teacher, too, is you get to experience some of the books that you may have experienced in high school or in college many years ago, only you get to experience them as an adult.
It's different.
So you go back and you look at them and you see what's really great and what isn't so great. And then you also, I don't know about you, but as a reader, I tend to inhale one author at a time. I pick up a book and I read it and I really like that book. So the first thing I do is go and look at whatever else she or he has written and find. And a lot of books, introduce universal themes as you have, but they might be more current themes. And then there's also all the historical fiction or historical nonfiction where you actually learn what life was like back then.
I would, if I were to begin writing another book, the idea that's foremost in my mind is the story of Michal, which that's not the way you pronounce it in Hebrew, but she's one of King David's wives. He had a lot of wives. She was the first, and I've never heard mention of her either in written work or in a sermon or whatever without her coming off looking really bad. She ended up giving King David a piece of her mind at one point, and it's always negative, and her story doesn't strike me like that at all.
So you'd like to tell the other side of the story?
I would like to give the backstory to this woman who was abandoned and neglected and given to someone else and then pulled back as a way of military whatever. And she was just pulled every direction. And so, of course, she was bitter. Of course she
had. And that's kind of, you think of the story of the musical Wicked. That's kind of what Wicked is. It's the backstory of the bad witch. No,
I've never seen that.
No? Okay,
I'll have to look into that.
So it's the backstory of why Glinda was the good witch and why, and I don't remember the bad witch's first name, but I'm sure somebody could fill me in. But it's the other side of the story, and look how incredible it has been as a success.
Very popular.
Yeah. So that's really a cool idea. So maybe the book that's inside you, or somebody who's listening, the book that's inside them, is a retelling from a different perspective of a story somebody already knows that changes the dialogue completely.
I think what some writers, how they err is they've got a great idea and they want to put it down, and they don't think about the fact that our brains read what they think that they should be seeing, and they don't go through the process of having other people read it, making suggestions. There's a little humility that needs to be there to realize that it may not be perfection the first time down. Good writers are rewriters. So it's always a good idea, even if it's just a school paper, to have somebody else read it, edit it, give you some suggestions, not think that, you have put it down as gospel and everyone needs to just be in awe of your writing ability.
Well, that's the thing, even on simple grammatical errors. If it's something you wrote yourself beyond thoughts, it's what makes sense to you, and it made sense to you coming out, and then you continue to read it and it still makes sense to you, because even if the explanation is not down on paper, you still know it, and you still know, you even insert words that aren't there
Yes.
when you're reading something over by yourself.
My mother was a very good proofreader. Anything that I gave to her, she would usually find a couple of mistakes. She was excellent.
And so it's nice to have a writers group,
Mm-hmm.
or even just a group of friends that you trust. And I know one of the things that I really enjoyed teaching, in addition to teaching English, was the years that I taught creative writing classes.
Yes.
Because you could figure out a way to turn somebody's ideas and stories into something that was better than what it began, and they figured out how to do it themselves. You know, the whole adage about you can teach a guy to fish and he'll have fish for the rest of his life. Will teach, a kid to write, and they'll be successful communicating for the rest of their life.
Well, I was teaching at Barnabas Christian Academy for a year and then one semester this year. Next year it will be rebranded as the Nation Christian Academy. But my first semester at Barnabas this past school year, I did teach a high school creative writing class. And one of the seniors wrote a little skit, and it was so good. I asked her to elaborate on it, and I added a little bit to it with her approval. And the high school drama group, which I was teaching, put it on for the school. And it turned out so well, and it affirmed her as a writer, because here this high schooler is putting on writing a skit that the whole student body is seeing. So anything that we can do as teachers and administrators to encourage students to get more creative, to take more risks, because some people don't want to write down or don't want anyone to read what they've written because they're afraid that it doesn't sound good enough or they made mistakes. Well, we can encourage them and gently guide them in areas of improvement, but not ever just put somebody down because they didn't use the right grammar or they spelled something wrong. That's not the heart of things.
No, but as you said, that does make something more readable when it is correct. But in today's world, if you're typing it into your computer, you do have spell check and you do have grammar check. So you have those tools to fall back on it. But there's nothing that beats somebody's suggestions. It will just make your writing stronger. Of course, in addition to books, we've talked about poetry, we've talked about blogs, letters to the editor.
Yes, I write occasionally a guest column for the paper now, but I also write for Indian River Magazine and Port St. Lucie Magazine and for Around Town Business Journal. Very different kinds of writings.
Right. Mostly profiles of people.
Personality profiles, and then I recently had a feature story in Indian River Magazine that was a lot of fun. And the Business Journal is more profiles of businesses.
And there's all different types of writing too, but I was also thinking of a girl who's in her 20s now, I think her late 20s, the older sister of a young man my son went to school with, and she and her sister, Gina and Lisa Gomez, are out in L.A. and they're script writing.
Cool.
And they write fantasy script, a lot of fangirl type stuff, and they're very successful at it, and that's another way of writing too. And there are all sorts of different classes out there that you can take.
Yes, IRSC offers workshops occasionally, and any creative writing class a person has time and finances to take is a good idea.
And then you've got the Inner Truth Project that
$5 donation.
Yeah, Wendy
chocolate.
Dwyer. Is it the first Monday of the month? Do you remember?
I think that it is the second.
Okay. So you can look on the Inner Truth Project their Facebook page and get information about that. Meanwhile, we've been really lucky to have our own published author, Ellen Gillette, in the studio today, and her book is called She Bear in the Beautiful Garden, and it is just a beautiful children's book that your child can read to his or herself, or you can read it out loud to them. It's a great book for somebody to read in a children's section of the library for Children's Hour. Beautiful illustrations, and Ellen illustrated all of the book inside herself with her friend who provided the cover art too. So She Bear in the Beautiful Garden, and you can get it online on Amazon, or you can go right to Ellen's website, which is www.shebearinthebeautifulgarden.com.
Or Barnes & Noble.
Or Barnes & Noble as well. So very exciting, and
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to seeing how you continue to promote the book, and then the next book that is coming. And, you get ideas, and, you think about keeping a notebook next to your bed, and do you keep, like, paper in your purse or paper around, or do you find yourself writing ideas on napkins and such?
Not so much. Usually, sometimes during the night, I will get an idea, and occasionally I'll write it down. More often than not, I wake up in the morning and think, what was that?
Well, sometimes, though, I have dreams that are so very detailed that it's almost like I wrote a whole book in the dream, but I never get up and write it down. And then as the day goes by the time I think about it again, I remember basically what it was, but I don't remember all those awesome details that I felt like I was just writing a book in my head.
Well, as we're winding up, I would like to encourage anyone who loves to write to read 2 books. One of them is Stephen King's on writing. Part of it's his biography, part of it is just a writing lesson, and it's excellent. He doesn't like adverbs. And the other is Writing Down the Soul, which we read together at the Inner Truth Project. It's
And I actually have a copy of that. Yeah.
Therapeutic, very helpful to journal, to get your ideas down.
That's awesome. So Writing Down the Soul and On Writing, 2 books that are good to get started with. You've been listening to the Sue Ellen Sanders Show. My guest today has been Ellen Gillette. She's the author of She Bear in the Beautiful Garden. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next week with more.
Archives of this show can be found on YouTube. Just look for WPSL TV. In fact, WPSLTV.com will take you to all of our archives.